Welcome fam! Before we dive into this beautiful story, please kindly subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts below. This is the exact moment Raina realized her mother-in-law had just tried to poison her, but what she did next shocked everyone. The crystal glass sat perfectly still on the mahogany table, its contents looking innocent enough. But Raina had seen it. That quick flick of Judith's wrist, the subtle drop of something clear dissolving into her drink, while everyone else admired the family's new oil painting. Raina's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She'd learned long ago that survival meant keeping your emotions locked away, especially in a house like this one in Chicago's Gold Coast, where every gesture was calculated and every smile had a price. The chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining room as she watched her husband Marcus laugh at his father's joke, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was supposed to be dead within the hour. Judith sat across from her, that perfect smile stretched across her Botoxed face, waiting for Raina to lift that glass, waiting for the toast that would end everything. But Raina had spent 28 years reading people's intentions like her life depended on it. Because it always had. Tonight was no different. She just had to be smarter than the woman who thought money could buy her anything, including murder. Raina had felt it from day one. This family's smiles were performances, and tonight, the show was about to end. She remembered their wedding 18 months ago, how Judith had given that toast that sounded like a blessing but felt like a curse. Welcome to our family, dear. I hope you understand what that truly means. Even then, Raina knew she was being warned. Growing up in Southside Chicago, she'd learned to spot predators early. Her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her to navigate her father's rotating girlfriends who saw her as competition for his attention and his disability checks. She'd survived by being invisible, by watching, by always staying 3 steps ahead of the next betrayal. Those skills had served her well in corporate America, helping her climb from secretary to marketing director at 26. But nothing had prepared her for the subtle warfare of old Chicago money. The Whitmore family had built their fortune in real estate and politics, their name carved into building foundations across the North Shore. They attended charity galas and country club dinners, their lives documented in society pages. But Raina saw what others missed. The way they froze out anyone who didn't fit their image, the cold calculation behind every gesture of kindness. She'd watched it happen to Marcus's ex-girlfriend Sarah, who'd simply vanished from family photos and functions after asking too many questions about the family business. Every powerful family has secrets, but this family's secret was worth killing for. Raina excused herself to powder her nose, her heels clicking against the marble floors as she made her way upstairs. The Whitmore mansion felt like a museum, cold, perfect, and full of things that weren't meant to be touched. But Raina had always been good at finding what wasn't meant to be found. In Judith's private study, she discovered the family photos with people literally cut out, leaving empty spaces where faces used to be. Sarah wasn't the first to disappear. There had been others. Marcus's father's business partners who'd asked uncomfortable questions, a housekeeper who'd worked for them for 15 years before suddenly moving back to Guatemala, a family lawyer who'd supposedly retired early, but whose obituary Raina found tucked in a desk drawer. The newspaper clippings told the real story. Prominent businessman's ex-wife dies in mysterious car accident. Former Whitmore employee found dead in apparent suicide. Each death had been ruled accidental or self-inflicted, but the pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. The Whitmores didn't just cut people out of photos, they cut them out of life. And tonight, it was her turn. She wasn't just fighting for her marriage anymore. She was fighting for her life. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the girl from the South Side, who'd been fighting since she could walk. Judith had done this before, and the missing family members weren't estranged. They were eliminated. Raina returned to the dining room with steady hands and a racing mind. She watched as Judith personally served each drink, something she'd never done before. The woman who usually commanded an army of staff was suddenly playing waitress, making sure each glass went to exactly the right person. "I thought we'd use the good crystal tonight," Judith announced, her voice honey-sweet. "This is such a special family dinner." She placed Raina's glass directly in front of her with theatrical care, her fingers lingering on the stem. "Family traditions are so important, don't you think, dear? Some things are simply sacred." Marcus's father, George, kept checking his phone and glancing at his watch. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his own glass, not with age, but with nerves. Whatever announcement he'd promised to make tonight had him terrified, and now Raina understood why. He wasn't just planning to reveal something about the family business. He was planning to expose Judith's affairs, her embezzlement, maybe even her previous murders. 2 birds, 1 stone. 2 threats eliminated in one evening. But George had made one fatal error in his calculation. He'd assumed his wife would poison the right target. As Raina watched Judith's satisfied smile, she realized this woman had gotten away with murder for decades simply because no one had ever turned her own methods against her. Tonight, that was about to change. Raina realized she wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her husband's soul. The family gathered around the table for what George called an important toast, but Raina could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. Marcus sat between his parents, completely oblivious to the war being waged around his dinner plate, talking excitedly about the promotion he'd just received at the law firm. "To family," George said, raising his glass with a shaking hand. "And to truth finally coming to light." His eyes met Judith's across the table, and for a moment, the mask slipped. Pure hatred flashed between them. 30 years of marriage reduced to mutual assured destruction. Raina felt a moment of pity for Marcus. In the next few minutes, his entire world would collapse. The parents he'd worshipped, the family legacy he'd been groomed to inherit, the pristine reputation he'd spent his life protecting, all of it would crumble. But better he learn the truth now than spend his life unknowingly married to his mother's next victim. She thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, so grateful to be accepted into this family, so eager to prove she belonged. That woman would have lifted the glass without question, trusting in the goodness of people who'd never shown her any. But survival had taught her that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, and love, real love, meant protecting the people who mattered, even from themselves. The father-in-law's announcement was going to expose Judith's affairs, and she was eliminating 2 threats with one move. As everyone prepared for the toast, Raina made her decision. She'd spent her whole life being reactive, dodging other people's bullets. Tonight, she was taking control of the narrative. "Oh, George," she said sweetly, standing to adjust the flower arrangement between them. "Let me just fix these roses. They're blocking the beautiful view." As she leaned across the table, her hip bumped the surface just enough to shift the glasses. In the confusion of steadying the flowers and apologizing for her clumsiness, she switched her poison glass with George's. Judith's eyes went wide as she realized what had happened, but it was too late. George, following family tradition, drank first and deepest. "To truth," he declared, draining half his glass before anyone else had taken a sip. Raina lifted what had been his glass to her lips, pretending to drink while watching Judith's face transform from triumph to horror. For 30 years, this woman had orchestrated deaths from the shadows, always maintaining plausible deniability. But tonight, she'd have to watch her husband die from her own poison while sitting helplessly at the family dinner table. Raina said, setting down her glass. This wine has such an interesting aftertaste. Very distinctive. Judith's hand flew to her throat as if she could feel the poison burning its way down her own esophagus. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey was finally showing her teeth. Power doesn't just corrupt, sometimes it poisons everything it touches. Within minutes, George began to sweat profusely, his words slurring as he tried to continue his toast. "I have something important to tell you all," he managed, his voice thick and strange. "About your mother, about what she's been." But the words dissolved into incoherent mumbling as he gripped the edge of the table, his face turning gray. Marcus jumped up in alarm. Dad, what's wrong?" The glass slipped from George's hand, shattering against the marble floor as he collapsed into his chair, convulsing. Chaos erupted. Marcus screamed for someone to call 911 while Judith sat frozen, her perfect composure finally cracking. She kept looking between her dying husband and Raina, her mind racing to figure out how this had all gone so wrong. The woman who'd orchestrated deaths with surgical precision was watching her own plan turn into her worst nightmare. "Help him!" Marcus shouted at his mother. "Do something." But Judith could barely move, paralyzed by the realization that every action she took now would be scrutinized, every word recorded. The surveillance cameras that George had secretly installed to catch her affairs were now documenting her attempted murder. Raina pulled out her phone with steady hands, dialing 911 with the calm efficiency of someone who'd expected this moment. As she gave the dispatcher their address, she kept her eyes on Judith, watching the woman's carefully constructed world crumble in real time. 30 years of marriage, and she'd never realized her paranoid husband had been recording everything. The surveillance system recorded everything, every lie, every secret, every crime. When the paramedics arrived, Judith tried one last desperate play. "It was her," she screamed, pointing at Raina with a shaking finger. "She's been trying to poison my family since she married into it. I saw her put something in his drink." But George, even in his weakened state, managed to gasp out the truth. "The cameras," he wheezed as they loaded him onto the stretcher. "Check the cameras." His eyes found Raina's across the chaos, and she saw something like gratitude there. In his final conscious moments, he understood that she'd saved him from drinking the poison meant for her while ensuring his wife would face justice for her crimes. Marcus stared at his mother in shock as the police reviewed the surveillance footage on George's laptop. There it was in high definition, Judith slipping something into Raina's glass, the careful switch during the toast, everything captured in brutal clarity. But that wasn't all the cameras had recorded. Years of footage showed Judith's affairs, her meetings with mysterious contacts, her careful planning of what were supposed to look like accidents. The family's dirty laundry was finally being aired, and Marcus looked like he was drowning in the revelation. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Mom, what did you do?" But Judith had no answer that could justify 30 years of murder disguised as family protection. The dynasty she'd killed to preserve was crumbling around her, and the woman she'd tried to eliminate was the only one left standing. In chess, the moment you realize checkmate is inevitable, the game is already over. As the police led Judith away in handcuffs, she caught Raina's "I won last time." "You think you've won?" she hissed. You have no idea what you've married into. This family has secrets that go back generations." Raina walked over calmly and placed her hand gently on Judith's shoulder. "You should have chosen peace," she whispered back. "I already had your son. Now I have your silence." She pressed a small recording device into Judith's palm. She'd been recording their entire conversation. "Try to blame me now, and the world hears everything you just confessed." The older woman's face went white as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered one final time. All her careful planning, all her years of manipulation, defeated by a girl from the South Side who'd learned to survive in ways Judith's privileged upbringing had never taught her. Marcus wrapped his arms around his wife as his mother was driven away. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed into her shoulder. "I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't protect you." But Raina had never needed his protection. She'd been protecting him all along, from a family legacy that would have destroyed his soul piece by piece. As they stood in the wreckage of his childhood home, Raina made him a promise. They would build something new together, something clean and honest and real. The Whitmore name might be ruined, but they could create their own legacy, one that honored life instead of destroying it. Raina saved her husband from his family, but could she save him from the guilt? 6 months later, they sat in their new apartment on the north side, modest compared to the Gold Coast mansion, but theirs. George had survived the poisoning and was cooperating with authorities, revealing decades of family crimes in exchange for a reduced sentence. The Whitmore empire was being dismantled piece by piece, their assets frozen, their reputation destroyed. Marcus still woke up some nights calling for his mother, then remembering where she was. The federal prison in Danville wasn't taking visitors yet. Judith was still considered a flight risk. But Raina held him through those dark moments, reminded him that he wasn't responsible for his family's sins, that love could exist without legacy. "I keep thinking about all the people she killed," he whispered one evening as they watched the sunset from their small balcony. "All the families she destroyed. How do I live with that blood money?" But Raina had an answer for that too. They were using every penny of his inheritance to establish a foundation for families of murder victims, turning blood money into something that honored life. The investigation had revealed the true scope of Judith's crimes. 17 suspicious deaths over 30 years, all people who'd threatened the family's power or discovered their secrets. The woman who'd tried to poison Raina had been Chicago's most successful serial killer, hiding behind charity galas and society pages. But Judith's final words haunted Raina. "This family has secrets that go back generations." Even from prison, she was planting seeds of doubt, suggesting that the evil ran deeper than anyone imagined. As Raina placed her hand on her still flat belly, she was 8 weeks pregnant. She wondered what other secrets the Whitmore family tree might be hiding, and whether some shadows were too dark to ever fully escape. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Would you have had the courage to switch those glasses? Subscribe for more shocking true crime stories about families with deadly secrets, and share this with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the person trying to destroy you ends up destroying themselves. What's the most toxic family situation you've ever witnessed? Drop your thoughts below. Your story might be featured in our next video.